Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Vertical Stars Podcast 4th season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. Enjoy this amazing interview because Ryan Parrott returns to the mothership to discuss It Killed Everyone But Me from Madcave Studios. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Parrott. Thank you for coming to Vertical Stars Podcast.
Thank you for having me back. It's nice to see you again.
Totally my pleasure. So we're going to talk about your book, It Killed Everyone But Me, which is a fantastic title, by the way. I really like it.
Thank you. I think you get the idea, which is nice, right?
Yeah.
It's not elusive.
It kind of says everything you need to say about the book. When I was reading the solicits, I was like, is this going to be a slasher comic based on the title? And it was, and 100% right on target.
Exactly,
So,
yeah.
what inspired the creation of the book?
I grew up on the '90s slasher movies. I really loved them. I loved the Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th and Scream and all that stuff. And I've always wanted to do something in that space. It's just always trying to find a way in. It just felt like I started playing with some of the traditional stuff and I just like the talky villains. Like Jason's cool and Michael Myers I love them. They're great. But like I've always gravitated towards the ones that like to taunt their victims a little bit because they're just fun to write. And so I was trying to come up with something for that, and I started playing with like the traditional, kids in the cabin out in the woods. And as I was writing it, I was like, I'm bored with this. Like I was like, it's fine, but I've just seen this so many times. What would happen to somebody if they survive that for real? Like, what do you do? What's the rest of your life look like? What kind of person are you? And every version I've ever seen is sort of the Jamie Lee Curtis, Halloween version or the Sarah Connor version, which is like they went crazy and that moment dictated their life. So I thought, well, what if you go what if somebody went the other way? What if somebody was like they had that happen and they kind of buried it away and they just had like they became like an alpha. They became sort of this like seemingly perfect person, but this thing is sort of like festering in the corner. And that's kind of where the whole idea came from, which I really liked, just this sort of concept of bearing away your trauma and then ultimately that thing sort of coming back to haunt you.
Now, from a writing standpoint, I mean, you're known for having written the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger book. You're writing Rogue Sun, which is fantastic, by the way.
Thank you.
How do you go from that mentally to moving into your slasher book? I mean, do you suddenly turn on like Nightmare on Elm Street and start watching it? Do you start screaming down the hallways? I mean, how do you get yourself in this proper place now to move to the slasher comic?
Well, Rogue Sun's already got a little bit of the horror stuff in it, tangentially. I think maybe not straightforward, but I just like horror movies. I saw Weapons this weekend, and I saw Sinners in the theater before that. So like, if there's a horror movie, I'll check it out. So I've always really liked it, and so it's not too far of a jump for me in regards to like wanting to do that stuff. I think horror in comics I think is a slightly different medium than movies and TV, obviously, but like you just have to do different things. I think. I always feel like there's like a little bit more, like you don't have sound, you don't have tension in the same way that you have with a comic. I don't think if I can get you with a jump scare in a comic book, like that's hard to do. I think Gideon Falls did it for me one time where I turned a page and there's like and there was like somebody just staring right at me and I was like, oh geez. So like I've been trying to go for that, but I think you have to sort of like flex a different muscle and try and find a way. I like to try and create dread in the comic, this idea and I think I like to try and use the voice of the villain in it to try and create a little bit of a like, oh God, please don't say that, that kind of stuff.
Now, you're talking about the kind of the construction of a horror page, right? Or a slasher page. Now, one issue I would imagine, unlike a movie where everything happens a second or two, the audience is like preparing a couple of seconds in advance for this next thing to happen, right? Everything's in the near future. When you read a comic book, your eyes, when you turn a page, can quickly dart across it at different panels. How are you plotting to make sure the surprise happens when you want it to happen, jump happens when you want it to happen before the eyes get there?
Well, I mean, that's where page turns are really, really helpful. You know what I mean? Like you can have people creeping through a hallway and then get to a turn and then flip that page and have a double page spread or a full page spread of something that you don't want to see. The introduction of the villain works a lot like that in the first issue is like this slow, like just stretching the reveals of stuff I think are really fun and the other thing that's really cool is you can use captions and you can use voices that come off screen. You can hide stuff in a sense, like you can't tell who's talking from just a balloon. You can really hide who people are and who's talking in fun ways. So it's just I think it's just more like trying to lean into the strengths of the medium as opposed to trying and emulate the stuff that you would see in a horror movie. I like to try and go with a little bit more of sort of the existential dread, the
Mm.
idea of what someone's saying, and hopefully that lingers in the back of your head as opposed to more of a blood and gore kind of stuff. Working with my artist, I think she was a little less is more. So she really liked the idea. I think she just liked the idea of more creepy imagery as opposed to like showing someone slash someone's heart out or whatever like that. She's like, we can try and do better, and I was like, yeah, let's go for that.
Now, I mean, obviously your artist on Rogue Sun is fantastic. I'm sure your artist for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was probably also extremely good. Do you need to trust your artist more in a slasher comic?
Oh, I think you 100% have to. We spent a long time trying to figure out. We actually waited on this to get her. She'd worked on House of Slaughter, and I remember we saw some of her pages, and I was so struck by the way that she draws eyes. Like they
Mm.
just peer through you in a really fun way, and there's like a staring element that I thought was really great. And so yeah, I think I would say your artist in a slasher comic is really important because they're going to create all of the mood. They're going to create all the tone and the mood and the angles they choose and just the level of detail. They are. It's a difference between a director that directs romantic comedies and a director that's going to direct. It's different between Greta Gerwig and David Fincher, right? It's a very different style.
Mm.
Both are good, but you're just going to get something different. So I think depending on the kind of, and I think you have to sort of, as you write the book, at least in this book, I definitely sort of like started to taper the story around what I thought were the things that she did the best and the things that she really liked to draw.
Mm.
And the way that she drew action, the way that she drew terror, the way she drew somebody coming out of the darkness, like I started to try to craft the book around that. So it becomes a little bit of a dance. You work a little bit, you come in with the concept, the artist comes on, you see how they start to translate your words, and then so you sort of just to try and highlight what they do best, and you kind of go back and forth on it.
Now, as you mentioned, she was very successful in the House of Slaughter book.
Yeah.
When you're writing the script for her, knowing her strengths, knowing that she is a professional and that it's a horror comic, do you kind of just like when you're writing your scripts, you kind of just write like in the panels, make this work, or do you like give actual details like make it like this, or do you just are just like make it scary, make it all work on the page?
Letizia is the way I'm going to go with her
It's
name.
easier. Okay.
No, sorry. I was like, I'm going to get it wrong. Letizia, you know what? Like, you just sort of trust it. Like, I don't, I think I try and craft the images a little bit, and like, I probably would be. It's a weird thing. I think if we would do more, like, if we worked, maybe if we were together again, I think I'd probably be a little bit more Marvel style in the sense of like being a little less like detailed about what I thought each image should be and what we're
Hmm.
seeing. But when you have to like, when you're still working at things out and you have to get to know each other, it's like some artists I've worked with, they very much want you to dictate exactly what you want on the page, like what you're looking for, because they're looking for you to guide them in the story. Other people, I think, like for instance, on Rogue Sun, with Abel having done 30 issues with him or so now I'm real comfortable letting him kind of take stuff. In fact, he's gotten very aggressive about actually changing the story in some ways, but it's actually always makes it better because I think when you've been drawing a comic for so long, you tend to try and want to do new things, and sometimes the writer's not thinking that way, and so like it's like there was a character in the previous thing, he was like, I really want to give this character a different power set, and I was like, you know what, go for it, and he did it. It's a way better choice. So I think it just that stuff comes, I think, with the more you work with somebody, the more you can sort of freestyle off each other.
Now, I kind of feel like colorists are criminally under
Oh,
discussed in comics, but I kind of, and I may be wrong, but I kind of feel like in a horror comic, especially a slasher comic, the colorist is also more doing more heavy lifting than you would on a normal comic book. So can you kind of talk about how the choices made by the colorist also is impacting the story that you're writing?
yeah, no, I totally agree. I especially in a horror book where you have the colors are going to dictate the tone. Alessandro does an amazing job. I know we were really excited. It's always really fun to start to work with a new colorist too, because they bring sort of this like stylistic approach to things. And I remember in Rogue Sun, I remember there was a an early, like in the first issue, somebody did a thing where like when they were punching them, they changed all the color to yellow, and it was because they were angry. And I was like, that's amazing. Like I never you something you couldn't do that in like a movie. If all of a sudden the
Right.
lighting just I mean, I guess you could if it was like a Scott Pilgrim movie or whatever. But like on comics, it's like it's such a cool way to like use sort of that thing. And Alessandro does some of that stuff in here where they really play with like the background tones, and we are also bouncing between two different time periods, so it was helpful to use the coloring as a way to sort of differentiate those so people don't get confused. But yeah, I mean, I would say it's a pretty important aspect of comics, especially with the horror. It's like they can really, you don't want it to be too bright and sunny and
Hmm.
saturated. You want to keep it real.
Now, there's different types of slashers in films. You have your Jason, as you said, Michael Myers, your Freddy, who is very obvious who they are. There's no mystery who Freddy is. Freddy is Freddy.
Yes.
In the story. Now, there's also the Scream type villains where it's the mystery of who the slasher actually is. So in this comic, how obvious is it who the slasher is?
We have a little bit of both, honestly. Well, the fun thing about this book is we have multiple killers because we're dealing with multiple bad guys in multiple time periods. And so we get a little bit of the combination of knowing who one is and having it be a little bit more of that silent type. That's the more aggressive style, the traditional masked killer, a little bit. And then we have the more talkative type. So yes, the first one is called the Heathen, and that's like the main character of the story. And that one is like, I guess the best way to, it's like Loki meets Freddy Krueger. That's the way I've been
Mhm.
playing with him. It's such a fun character to write. Just somebody who loves to play with their food and enjoys the idea of tormenting you to the point of like, it's not just they don't want to just kill you. They want to make you feel every second of fear, and that makes it better for them. As opposed to another character that I don't think I can say yet, but the other villain, there's another villain in the story who's a little bit more feral and a little bit more that's the way to describe it, vicious. And so it's fun to play with both. And so, I tried to do a little bit of everything in this horror book. I tried to do a little bit of the, you don't know who the real killer is because, these are monsters that can be sort of manipulated by other people and whatnot. And so there's a little bit of all that. So like, yes, there's always those different sort of categories of the stuff. And hopefully A Killer with Me gives you a little bit of everything.
So when you're the part that's the mystery, it's hard to stay a step ahead of your reader because you do have to determine how smart your reader actually is on some level. How much is too obvious, or how much is it gonna be so out of the box that at the end you don't want your reader going, well, that's bullshit. You have some work so you need to go backwards. It goes, oh, that makes sense, kind of
Right.
on some level. So how do you determine how much you can give away, how much you can't, how much needs to be on the page?
Um, I my attitude towards sort of revealing things has changed and grown over the years. I think when my early years of writing, I think I would have been very much the you can't tell people anything and you got to keep it all close to your chest because that's the point. And then I've kind of come around with the idea that like, because there's so much material out there, there's so many movies and TV shows and comic books and everything. It feels like you have to be a little more open to the idea of sort of letting people in on like when it's not for lack of interest, it's just lack of time, right? Most readers who are into comics and TV and stuff like that, they have a minimum. They have this is how much energy they have for all their stuff, and so they. This is why I think we gravitate more towards the IP stuff that we know. It's just because it's like, well, I only have an hour. I only have 2 hours a night. I want to watch something that I know I'm going to be interested in, and
Yeah.
trying something new is hard because you don't know, and it's like I don't want to waste my time on a book that's not interesting. And so I have come around to the idea of being a little more open about what things are and trying to tell you what you're involved in, and then hoping that the details and the subversion of the stuff that I like is enough to keep you excited, is enough to keep the person interested. Just because it's hard to cut through the noise and have anybody try. I'm amazed anybody ever picks up one of my books when they don't know what it's about. Like that's the most flattering thing in the world.
But it sounds like my wife, because every once in a while we'll be like, what do you want to watch tonight? And I'll name us something. She's like, I don't have the energy for something new. I don't have.
Exactly.
I gotta, I can't start a new show at this point. I'm not ready for that.
Oh, the amount of times I have watched, my wife and I have watched Below Deck because that's our compromise show. Like she wants to watch something super heavy and dark. Let's go watch Mad Men, and I'm like, hey, the Traders is on, and she's like, can we find something in the middle, and then we'll find that. That's how it always works. So I get it. I feel the same way.
I find for us, we're currently been watching Worst Cooks in America because
Oh,
that's
there we go.
like the easy show that you can just jump into because it's not like it takes a lot of thought. You have to like there's no plot involved. You just sit. this is what we're gonna watch because she won't agree with what I want to watch today. I can't get into something new, and for her, it's just like something we recognize.
Exactly.
That's awesome. At least I'm not the only couple that
Oh
functions
no.
that way.
I think
So
many a marriage has been saved by the British baking show,
yeah.
honestly. Yeah.
All right, so for Sudden Reed, who's like I said is the last girl from the last massacre, right? Or the
Yeah.
final girl they call him, the final girl.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's now a realtor. How well known is what happened to her from those around her? Is this something that she's coping with? Do they recognize is there someone who's survived? How does that work?
Yes. So the events that happened are 100% well known in the area. I think it's faded over time. I think it's the older generation that knows. Maybe the younger generations probably talks about it, but doesn't know the specifics. So she is well known for being a survivor, and in fact, that plays a pretty heavily plays a part in the story. There's a point where one of the co-leads, Ian Shell, comes in to investigate, like to go up to her house, and she's like, "I don't talk to podcasters, I don't talk to lawyers, I don't talk to the press." Like, it's clear she's been dealing with this for her entire life. And but yeah, so she plays it's she. But that's the other thing that's interesting about this is, like, for somebody who's known for one of these sort of amazing, sort of surviving a massacre event, and has a lot of conversations about and speculation about what happened, how much did she tell was actually the truth, is she holding back, all that stuff. That's something that's a cloud that's always drug her, but she has not left that town. And that plays a big, anybody else probably would have been like, let's go someplace else, start over and start over. But she's had to stay there for a reason that's very clear in the book. I don't want to spoil it, but that's part of the reason she still stays there, and has to suffer through all of sort of the side glances and whispers behind her. But what I liked about her, she's become a realtor. And I thought there's something really interesting about this idea of, like, she's a very broken person by what happened, but does not want to admit that she is like that. And so she sort of, like, has taken this fractured life of hers and basically been and presenting it as, like, this is as perfection. And what I love is she actually kind of does that with her job. She takes these less than ideal homes and presents them as perfect little beginning side. Like, if it has if it's too small, it's cozy. If you want nature around it, you can if it's not interesting enough, it's a blank canvas. And so she's somebody who's very good at sort of rationalizing and reframing stuff, because that's what she does for herself and that's what she does for other people. And I really like that element. There's a part in the first issue where she talks about painting a door red and as a way to, like, up the price value. And I always like that, because I remember there was this house when I was a nanny I used to drive by all the time, and it was this, like, beautiful house and a red door. And I was like, there's something about the red door that I was like, that is, like, the dream. Like, there's a perfect life behind that red door. And it's probably not, it's full, but, like, I just looked at that and I was always like, everybody wants a house with a red door at some point in their life.
But one thing you said that was very kind of interesting is that you mentioned that there's a question from those who live in her community about her. Because I guess one thing they don't discuss very often as well is if you're the last one to survive a massacre, there's a question of how you pull that off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how much suspicion is she under with those around her? How healthy is that to live under?
Um, I think they obviously never charged her, and I think the reality of that is, I don't think this spoils anything, but she wasn't entirely okay. Let me put it this. I'll just use this. I'll use a metaphor so I don't spoil
Okay.
anything in the book. What do you think when Nancy in Friday the 13th, or sorry, in Nightmare on Elm Street, if Nancy tells people, I killed a dream demon that murdered all my friends, like, and survived, no one would, she'd be locked up because no one would believe her.
Right.
So what would you have to tell people and if you did survive something that was supernatural, what would you have to tell people in order to not either be locked away, or for people to think you're the one who survived? Like, maybe you're the one, like, what last survivor usually has the blade, right?
Right.
And so that's an ongoing question in the story.
I was just thinking about Sydney from Scream is like, she did survive a lot of murders, many different types of murders at some point. It's
Except
you.
before you start to look at her and go, there's a commonality here, kiddo.
Right.
Yeah,
And if you're not the one doing it, I still don't want to be around you
exactly.
for
Yes,
whatever reason.
exactly.
So, I mean, once again, going diving into the psychology of Sudden, how does she feel about it all and having been the survivor? Is she something that she's preparing for if it ever happens again, like Sydney seems to in Scream? Is she someone who's just like, wow, that was weird, and has been able to move on completely and not thought about it, the potential whatever could happen again from that? What does she think about that whole situation and that and being that final survivor?
For her, she's the opposite of Sydney and Lori and all those people. Like that, she very much. I mean, the whole book, if I'm being particularly honest and sort of take a step back from it all, is it's a giant metaphor for how some people deal with trauma.
Hmm.
In the sense, and look, I know it's very cliche to have a horror book that it's about deep grief and trauma. Like that's what every freaking comic, every horror story is about the same thing these days. But there was something really interesting about this that I liked, which was this concept of if you went through something as brutal as that, and like what would you have to do to survive? You know, most people who go through really bad trauma in their when they're young, whether that be whether it be abuse or whether it be any of that stuff, right? They tend to like push that stuff away. They
Hmm.
either go into it and get therapy, but most people don't. Most people just take that stuff. They tend their subconscious sort of like hides that stuff and buries it away, and they move on with their lives. And that's not a good thing. That stuff can always come back and haunt you, and it sort of it can seep into your relationships and the way that you handle being loved and the way that you parent people and the way that and that's really what Sutton is. Sutton, when you meet her from the outside, she looks like she's doing fantastic. She has this wonderful job. She's very straightforward, but she's got a broken marriage. She's not a particularly great mom, and she's not particularly involved, and she's hated in the community. But she keeps barreling forward at full speed, and so that's the thing. I think that's the hard part about the story is in order when this thing comes back into her life, when there's another series of murders, she finally has to dig up that trauma, literally, and go face to face and go up against her. She has to face her victimizer. And that is the hardest thing she's ever done and something she doesn't like to do. But she does it in order to try and stop and save other people's lives. So that's the hero element of this. But she's not prepared for it. And it is going to be a very dark and very scary, drive.
So, other than Sudden and obviously the killer, is there anyone else who knows the truth either because they figured it out or because she was able to be honest with them about it? Is there anyone else who she can talk to about the situation or who at least knows the situation or what happened?
Yeah, she's drawn back into this through a private investigator named Ian Shell, who was there's a child missing in the beginning of the series, and comes there and says, I, I this missing child in this situation is very similar to what happened to you all those years ago, and I don't entirely believe the reports that I've read. I want you to tell me the truth. And she doesn't want to do that. And so he starts to dig into what actually happened and starts to find it. And eventually those two will come to a head, and you'll have to, he becomes a part of the story. So he's his motivations as to why he's a private investigator, why this case matters to him, all those things, that all comes out through the wash as the story progresses. But he hasn't seen it up front. He's more of a, he's more of the normal person who's like, yeah, so there's a dream demon, and you're like, no, there's not. Like, he's a very pragmatic person, so it's going to be a little harder for her to convince him that there are powers and evils outside of the realm of normal, the normal world, for him to sort of like eventually sort of step in. So he kind of plays our perspective, the audience's perspective, and sort of like taking a step into things beyond our understanding.
And as the writer, right? Can we talk about once again the final girl? And as you mentioned, the idea of the final girl is one of the most celebrated aspects of slasher films. As you mentioned, we mentioned Nancy, we mentioned Sydney. They're the Ripley. I mean, those are the characters that people just remember and or celebrated for years and years and years to come. What is the challenge of writing your own final girl to make sure she's up to the standards of the others as a way to, or is it to make her totally different from them? What kind of pressures are you under to write your own final girl?
Well, what I liked about, I mean, what's fun about doing a final girl, and it's like, it's weird. I'm almost kind of doing, I didn't realize until I said this, I am also kind of doing the first movie and the sequel at the same time,
Mm.
because you're seeing what happened at the cabin all those years again, but you're also seeing who she is now. So it's like you'd imagine if you see Ripley going up against the alien, while at the same time it's Ripley having come to the Earth and having not wanting to go back to LV-426 and all that stuff. And so I liked that idea. I liked seeing two different versions. I like seeing sort of the sweet and innocent person in the past, and seeing how she's changed, and the idea is that, like, trying to use her as sort of not a metaphor, but just sort of a person that you can understand. You can look at her and go, "Oh, I don't necessarily love the choices you've made, but I understand the choices you've made. I understand the life that you've built around you and the walls that you've created." And a lot of, I think what's interesting, to your point, which is like, how do you live up to the legacy of the Final Girls? What's really funny about them is, like, I always find that the Final Girls that you bring back in the second and third and fourth installments or whatever are so interesting, because you have to find new ways
Mm.
of crafting them. I just heard the other day that the only reason that Sarah, I'm blanking on her name right now, the who plays Sarah Connor, the
Oh,
actress.
Linda Hamilton.
Linda Hamilton, thank you. Linda Hamilton came back. The only reason she came back to the second one, she goes, "I want to play crazy. I don't want to be the same person I was. I would be a different person." And it's crazy to me that that was Linda's idea, that that's not James Cameron. That was the actress going, like, where would I be? I would be a very different person. And I think that's the fun part, is like you meet them in the past and then you see the new person they are. And that, I think that's the part that's interesting, is that growth of that character over the series. And so I think it was just trying to find those ways that they can feel like different characters, but they feel like different characters, but the same person.
Now, how hard is it to write two separate timelines? I mean, do you literally have like a board in the back, like the little red string, like this connected there, that was there, so I don't forget what the hell happened, and to do it in a way that the audience doesn't get lost in what's happening. So, like, how hard was it to organize that?
It's fairly simple in the sense that, like, one is takes place in a singular location, so every time you go back to that location, it hopefully helps connect the two timelines. But it does get a little confusing, and it does say, I guess the thing is, if you are writing a two timeline things and the characters are talking the same way, then you probably are writing it wrong, because
Mm,
they probably, I don't talk the same way I talked when I was 17.
yeah.
So you got to make sure that you adjust that. So hopefully you do a good enough job in just the personalities of the characters. And then you also, you depend on the artist, you depend on the colorist to sort of create a different style and utilize that stuff. So that there's a different sort of, like, a director choosing, like, we don't have different color schemes or anything like that, but just like a different aura to it
Hmm.
all. But hopefully it sticks together. I didn't find it too confusing, but I also, I wrote it, so who knows?
So I'm sure this is gonna be spoiler territory, so don't if you feel free to blow the
No
question off as
shade.
much as you wish. What can you say about the nature of the slasher, or either slasher, the past, present, or depending on as they're the same or different? I know that's spoilerish as well, but what are you able to say about the nature of the slasher?
I can say this, like, my favorite part of the story is the present day storyline, because it's a little bit of, I pitched it before, but it's Silence of the Lambs meets Nightmare on Elm Street, and this idea
Hmm.
of of Sutton having to work, not only confront but work with the thing that murdered her friends and hates her, and, or I guess hate's the wrong word,
Hmm.
but terrorizes her and torments her and won't help without getting a little bit of quid pro quo, not to steal from Silence of the Lambs. But that part is the really fun part, is the idea of the back and forth between these two people who have a little bit of history, and one who just wants to, tear apart your mind. So I really enjoyed writing that stuff. And the heathen is a very dark and very twisted character, and I find that comes very natural to me, which is either a really good thing or a terrible thing. I'm not quite sure.
Probably somewhere in the middle, maybe.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Hopefully, the comics is therapy and not
Right.
a biography. Uh, but yeah,
So,
that was the idea. Is just, I really enjoy sort of the back and forth between them as the series progresses, and a weird uh, understanding or better understanding of each other. Where what the heathen is, where he comes from, what he wants, and Sutton sort of understanding that, what she did, and the price that got paid, because you don't know exactly what happened at the
hmm.
cabin. There's a version of the story that you tell at the beginning, but you learn throughout the story that that's not exactly what happened, and there was maybe some sacrifices that were made and some lies that were told to protect certain people. So
Hmm.
that's the fun part. Well, the backstory is a little bit of a mystery, while the present day is a little bit more of I would say a cerebral chess match.
Well, in the solicit, the one of the pages that was available to read in the solicit, it has the narrator discussing through caption the nature of a monster as being something inhuman who enjoys cruelty. Now, does that make it better or worse than a person who kills for pleasure of an ulcer? So is a monster then worse than just a bad person in that case?
I think the way I was looking at that monologue was just looking at it in the sense of, you know, we seem to think that people who do horrible things are monsters. Like, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, oh, as if it's somehow they're a separate species from the rest of us. When the reality is that everything is anybody is capable of anything at any time. And maybe that's the scary. It's like we almost create the illusion of maybe we've created the illusion of a monster as a way to sort of protect ourselves from thinking how far we would go and what we might do given the certain circumstances. And so
Hmm.
that was the way I presented it. Is like, is there an entity, is there something more, what's scarier, right? The concept of there's something out there in the darkness that we don't understand that could come get us, or there's something inside of us that we don't understand.
Hmm. I mean, I think that's a fascinating idea. Because if it's us, then the monster's everywhere. If the monster's in the dark,
That's a much simpler and better version than what I wrote right here. I think.
well, I was just thinking, if it's in the dark, you know well enough, you can just keep away from the dark.
Yeah,
If it's everywhere, then there's nowhere safe.
indeed.
Which I think
That
is
might be what the show. Maybe that's what the book's about.
I think no, it just looked very cool. I look forward to seeing the whole issue. 'Cause I only had those a few pages that we had in this list, but it sounds absolutely fascinating. So, how many issues is it slated for?
It's slated for 5 right now. Yeah, so we'll see if the it's designed to go longer if the appetite of the audience is there. But it's a completed thought for the first 5, but I wrote it as a trilogy. So if we get to do more, that'd be great.
And when's the first issue coming out?
September 10th.
September 10th. And what's next?
What?
What's next for you?
What's next? Oh, that is what's next for me. Currently, I have I'm writing the Rogue Sun is going on, so I guess that's what's next. Rogue Sun is with Image. I'm on issue 30, and issue 31, Medieval Spawn's going to be in it. So that if you like,
Oh, very cool.
yeah, very excited about that. And then I'm also I think the first issue of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Volume 3 just came out. So if you like lots of Rangers and mutants going back and forth and lots of evil bad guys, you might like it. It's the third one I've got. I can't believe I've gotten to do 3 of those things. It's so much fun. But I'm doing those 2 currently. And that's all right now. Everything else is sort of up in the air. So yeah.
Well, it sounds awesome. And like I said, It Killed Everyone With Me sounds like an awesome book. I can't wait for it to come out. And Mr. Parrott, it's been an absolute honor to speak with you again.
Likewise, man. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Have a great night, sir.